My mother sabotaged me and then used the damage as evidence that I was the problem. She could interfere with my ability to succeed, watch me struggle under the consequences, and then point to that struggle as proof that she had been right about me all along. We try so hard with her. We've given her everything. She's still a problem. What am I to do? I lost count of how many times I overheard that while I was a teenager. If you only heard her version, my mother was the long-suffering parent trying desperately to save her difficult daughter from herself. The person hurting me also had the authority to explain what my pain said about me. If I became angry, the anger could be separated from what provoked it and presented as instability. If I resisted, I was difficult, I was obstinate. If I eventually collapsed underneath enough pressure, there was proof that something had been wrong with me all along. A child cannot see that structure while she is dependent on the person inside it. She assumes the adults know something about her that she does not. Instead of asking, "What is happening to me?" she learns to ask, "What is wrong with me?" I became extraordinarily perceptive about other people and strangely unwilling to trust what I perceived. I could recognize easily why someone lied, controlled, withdrew, or punished. I could find the wound underneath almost anything, and then the wound would become more important than the actual behavior. I could feel contempt underneath a joke and wonder whether I was being too sensitive. I could recognize control and immediately find the fear underneath it. Understanding someone gave me a way to remain connected without confronting what their behavior required from me. For years, I thought I needed better discernment. Eventually, I realized that I often saw things clearly. The difficulty came when what I knew required action. Believing myself might mean disappointing someone, withdrawing access, leaving a relationship, or accepting something I desperately wished were different. I had learned to use compassion to negotiate against my own perception whenever trusting it threatened attachment. That conditioning followed me into my relationship with success. If your growth repeatedly creates conflict with someone you depend on, expansion does not necessarily feel like freedom. You can consciously want visibility while your body remembers what visibility used to provoke. You can work towards something for years and hesitate when it finally arrives. I used to call some of that self-sabotage. Now, I am more interested in what the hesitation learned to protect. Sometimes the fear is not about success. It is the old consequence of becoming harder to control. 15 years as a dominatrix eventually gave me language for power that my childhood never could. I spent years in rooms where power was explicit. If I held authority, everyone knew it. Boundaries were negotiated beforehand. Consent mattered. My authority had limits because the person surrendering some control to me still belonged to themselves. That experience made me less frightened of visible power and much more attentive to power that needed to disguise itself as something else. Some of the most damaging control I have ever experienced did not announce itself as control. It announced itself as concern, protection, love. I learned that you do not have to control every decision another person makes if you can establish yourself as the authority on what their behavior means. Their anger becomes instability, their boundary becomes cruelty, their independence becomes selfishness, their resistance becomes further evidence that they need to be managed. Power becomes extraordinarily difficult to resist when the person exercising it gets to remain innocent of having any power at all. Funny how that works. That was what I had never been able to name about my mother. Her influence was not limited to what she could do to me. She taught me to question myself on her behalf. Once that happens, the original person does not have to remain physically present for the pattern to continue. I could meet completely different people and reproduce the old arrangement internally. Something would feel wrong, and I would search for the explanation that made me responsible for it. The people changed, the reflex remained. There was another consequence that looked much healthier from the outside. I became determined to make the old story impossible to believe. I became independent because I never wanted dependence used against me. I became articulate because I knew what it felt like to have my meaning distorted. I studied human behavior because I never wanted to be that confused again. Those qualities are genuinely mine. I refuse to reduce everything powerful in me to trauma. But eventually I had to ask whether I was building because I wanted something or because some part of me was still answering an accusation. That question brought me underneath the anger. I wanted my mother to be delighted by me. I wanted my growth to be good news. I wanted the person who made me to be curious about who I became rather than invested in who she had decided I was. A daughter should never have to calculate how much intelligence, independence, joy, or success a relationship can tolerate before her becoming threatens the attachment. For years, I carried the hope that becoming undeniable would resolve that. If I became successful enough, healed enough, visibly well enough, surely the old story would finally collapse. But achievement cannot create capacity in another person. It cannot make someone see what they are unwilling or unable to see. No adult accomplishment can travel backward through time and give a child the experience of having her becoming welcomed. I had to grieve what I did not receive instead of making my future responsible for repairing it. My spiritual life deepened that understanding, and I am grateful. I believe attention has an energetic reality. My experiences through shamanic practice, energy healing, and my own awakening are inseparable from how I understand human connection. But I have become wary of making every lingering attachment into an elaborate metaphysical problem. You can call something a cord, karma, or energetic entanglement while continuing to give someone enormous amounts of your consciousness. Sometimes the attachment persists because some part of us is still waiting for recognition, remorse, or vindication. I began paying attention to where my consciousness was still waiting. Was I making a choice because it belonged to me, or anticipating what my mother would think? Was I allowing myself to succeed, or imagining whether my success would finally change the dynamics with that woman and our story? I could not reclaim my energy while I was continually returning to an old argument, an old injustice. At some point, freedom required me to allow her to misunderstand me, to judge me, to even hate me. That does not mean I assume I am always right, but I want to remain capable of examining myself, receiving criticism, changing my mind, and confronting my own shadow. But humility and self-abandonment are not the same thing. Another person can be absolutely certain about me and still be wrong. And I'm okay with that. I can understand why someone became who they are without allowing their history to determine what I tolerate. I can hear another person's version without moving out of myself to live inside it. The body can take longer to learn that than the mind. You can understand why visibility became frightening and still contract when you are truly seen. You can know a boundary is appropriate and still feel guilt when somebody dislikes it. You can recognize that an old authority no longer has power over you while your body still continues preparing for its reaction. Insight can reveal the pattern without automatically changing every place the pattern still lives. This is the depth at which I work privately. If you've spent years understanding your history, but still feel yourself shrinking around visibility, abandoning your perception to preserve connection, or organizing your choices around reactions that belong to another time or even another timeline, my work brings the psychological pattern, nervous system, body, energetic experience, and spiritual life together. If you're ready to work with me at that depth, you can find the information below. Now, as we wrap up, I want to say something. My mother was my first bully and my greatest saboteur. I wish that were not true. However, I no longer need to make it less true to protect anyone from what it means. And I no longer need the rest of my life to prove that it happened. For years, I thought freedom meant becoming so successful, so healed, and so undeniable that nobody could ever place me in that old role again. But the successful daughter, the healed daughter, the vindicated daughter, and the daughter who finally wins are still identities built in response to the same accusation. I do not need a better role in her story. I get to become a woman whose life is no longer a rebuttal. What happened to me is part of my history, but it does not get to remain the audience for my future. I do not need my mother to see me accurately before I am allowed to live beyond her version of me. The little girl who spent years trying to prove she was never the problem does not need a stronger defense anymore. She gets to stop defending herself and actually live. I am Kat Grace. Thank you for being here. Until next time, namaste.